Hello everyone and welcome to this video tutorial on how to apply the law on offer and acceptance to a contract scenario. In this tutorial we'll be looking at a mini scenario on offer and acceptance involving the beautiful chinchilla Persian Mara here, and we'll be reminding ourselves how you pull out the issues in an offer acceptance scenario and how you use the idea structure to make sure that you get a lovely answer to this in the exam. Let's start by having a look at the scenario. So Lucy rang Sophie and said she'd sell her a chinchilla kitten for £550. What a bargain, look at her. Sophie suggested that she would pay £550 if she delivered the kitten to her house. Obviously Lucy doesn't like driving, so she said she would think about it. After 2 days, Sophie rang Lucy and said she'd pay £550 and she'd collect the kitten herself, but by that time, Lucy'd already sold the kitten to someone else. And you're being asked to advise Sophie. Obviously, Sophie's desperate to have this little kitten, so she wants to show that there's a contract between herself and Lucy. And it all boils down to whether there's been a valid offer and acceptance here. As always, before we pull out the issues, it's useful to remind yourself what the law is on offer and acceptance or whatever it happens to be that you're applying. So I've just switched back to our summary page here on offer and acceptance, and you can see by the sheer volume of cases on this slide that there's an awful lot to offer and acceptance, and that's why it's a very popular exam question. So these are all our cases up to here on offer, and then acceptance here. So you need to make sure that you know this law really well before you attempt to answer a scenario. Key things will always pop up in these scenarios, things like differentiating between an offer and an invitation to treat, differentiating between an offer and a statement of minimum price, things such as lapse of time. Has the offer ended through lapse of time? Has there been an unconditional acceptance, or has there been a counteroffer? Postal rule often crops up as well. So although there's a lot here, not all of these issues are going to be involved in your scenario. And that's why it's useful to look at as many scenarios as you possibly can so that you're not thrown by anything. You're ready to apply the law to whatever you're given in the exam. You do need to know all of this because this will be in your E, in your explain, but you will just be pulling out the few that apply in your given scenario. So that's our little recap then. Let's go back to the slide and have a look at what our issues are with Lucy. So useful to get a highlighter so you can highlight issues as they arise. So it says Lucy rang Sophie, and that's quite important, and said she would sell her a chinchilla kitten for £550. Now, the fact that Lucy's rang Sophie and said that she'll sell for £550 looks like that's an offer. Okay, quite often in these scenarios, you have invitations to treat to begin with. Quite often it'll be, a car with a price tag on, something like that. But that isn't the case here. We've got a phone conversation with a price being stated, so that looks like an offer. Our next issue then is that Sophie suggested she would pay £550 with delivery. Now that raises an interesting issue here. Does this mean that we've got a counter offer? So is Sophie counter offering £550 with delivery? Or is she just requesting further information, saying £550 if you just drop her off? Yeah, is it not really a different offer? Is it her accepting it with a slight caveat? Lucy said she would think about it. Now this is important as well, because the fact that Lucy said, I'll think about it, suggests that this is a counter offer. Yeah, £550 if she delivers it. Lucy goes, I'm going to think about that. So Sophie's made a counter offer. Lucy's going to think about it. After 2 days, Sophie's rang Lucy and said that she would pay £550 and collect the kitten herself. So at this point, what she's essentially trying to do is go back to the original offer, isn't she? She's trying to accept that original offer by Lucy. But it's worth making the point that that original offer won't exist because this counter offer's destroyed it. So really, when Sophie's ringing Lucy and said she'll pay 550 and collect, that's a new offer, or a new counter offer, if you like. At that time, Lucy had already sold the kitten to someone else. Now, it's okay for Lucy to have sold to someone else because when there was this offer by Sophie, 550 with delivery, Lucy said she'd think about it. She's not accepted that. She said she needs time to think. So Lucy was fine to sell the kitten to someone else. That's annoying for Sophie, but Lucy hasn't done anything wrong. The only way Lucy's sort of breached an agreement here is if that isn't a counteroffer. Let's have a look at how we use the idea structure, and then we'll look at a bullet point answer on this. As always, we're going to use the idea structure to answer this scenario. So we're going to identify that Sophie needs to prove that there's a valid offer and acceptance to show that there's a contract. Define offer and acceptance here in your D. And then your E, you're going to explain all of the law on offer, that's my purple bit, and explain all of the law on acceptance, that's my blue bit. So in essence, you are just writing out all of the law here, and you will have to have memorised that like a parrot so that you can do it nice and fast in the exam. And then final step, you're going to apply the relevant rules to your scenario. So there's such a lot here, not all of that will be relevant. With that Lucy-Sophie situation, lots of that didn't apply at all. So in our application, we're just going to pull out things that were relevant. On this slide here, I've got a bullet point answer to the scenario. The little red ones, you can ignore those. That's just a rough mark scheme for if we were using it in class. So you start off by saying Sophie needs to prove there's valid offer and acceptance. Define offer and acceptance. You can see there that I've explained offer and acceptance with all my cases. Mine's very bullet pointy. You will write in beautiful full sentences, but this is just for the purpose of the slide. And then my application. So I've abbreviated here, L standing for Lucy, S standing for Sophie. So Lucy tells Sophie she'll sell for £550. Could be an offer, or it could be a statement of the lowest price she'd consider. Even if Lucy did make an offer on the phone with that £550, we saw that Sophie doesn't accept unconditionally as required by Hyde and Wrench, because Sophie suggests paying £550 with delivery. Now that could be simply a request for further information. Would you mind delivering it as well? i.e. not really changing the terms of the offer, just requesting more information, but more likely to be a counter-offer. And the fact that Lucy responds by saying she'll think about it suggests that it was a counter-offer. Sophie, then a few days later, attempts to accept Lucy's original offer of £550, but Lucy's sold the kitten. If Lucy had made an offer and Sophie's £550 with delivery business was really just a request for clarification, Lucy would have breached the contract. But if Sophie made a counter offer with this £550 with delivery, Lucy didn't accept that. There's no breach. She was free to sell to somebody else. And I've put here as my conclusion, seemingly the latter. So it looks like there's no breach at all because Sophie's made a counter offer which Lucy doesn't accept. So I hope that's been helpful, having a look at that Lucy and Sophie scenario. Do have a look at my other video tutorials where I'm applying the law on offer and acceptance, because students often find these scenarios a bit challenging at first, but as I said before, the more of them you look at and the more of them you practice, the easier it will become.